There we are. We are live. Hello,
Hey,
everyone. Good morning. I can already see we've got a lot of regulars in the chat. So, hello, everybody. I am not going to welcome everyone personally. I am only going to welcome you today, Alyssa, because we have so many questions that I'm afraid we might not get through them all. And
Oh, well,
so,
let's get to it then. And thank you so much for having
yeah.
me. And great to meet
Well,
all of you.
like to make a really quick introduction, do you want to just tell everyone like which agency you work for, how long you've been an agent, and give like a really quick introduction?
Absolutely. So in about 2 weeks, I'll have been an agent at Stonesong, which is like right there, for 10 years. But I have been in the business for a little over 11 because I had to intern first and learn what I was doing before I started doing it. And it's been a wonderful journey. I'm so glad to have been at Stonesong for so long and work with such amazing people who do such a variety of books. But my specialty sort of lies in illustrated books because my background is in art. I have a degree in illustration from the Maryland Institute College of Art. So I, graphic memoir, graphic novels, some picture books, but just kind of like highly visually illustrated projects of all kinds are something that I have a lot of on my list. But I do plenty of regular fiction and nonfiction as well. And I'm excited to talk to you a little bit about my experience of being an agent and what I've picked up over the last decade.
Well, I'm not going to lie. One of the reasons why I thought that you would be really fun to come in is because I also have an art degree. And so I
Oh,
was
there you
like,
go.
oh, there's my fellow artist. I have
That's
a
right.
feeling we would get along. So, okay, here we go. Let's jump into the first question. And let's see, I've kind of got to scroll. And all right, this one is actually, we're going to start easy because it's a personal question for you. And we had someone who wants to know, do you accept author only picture book queries? I know that that's a thing, author illustrators and author only, for those
Right.
who don't write picture books who are listening.
Right. So like text only is honestly the majority of submissions. I think it would be pretty like more and more often. I think, hey, sweetie, have fun. Sorry, my son is going to the park with my husband. um, I, it's really common to see text only submissions. There has definitely been a sort of a shift in attitude lately that illustration has become like much more part and parcel of being an agent. Like I was one of like actually like the first agents to represent illustrators sort of hand in hand. It's like me and Charlie Olson basically with like everything else we did. So now that's much more common, and editors I think have an easier time with bringing in someone who is an author illustrator. Teams are also really common. I found that editors are a little bit more flexible, but there are some agents that do really, really want author illustrators, in part because it makes the deals a little bit easier in that you only have to deal with one contract and you don't have to split the commission at all. But this is why I tend to just try and put my authors with my illustrators, because then it's pretty much the same. But of course, you can't always control that. Sometimes the editor has a very strong vision in mind for someone that they've already worked with. And in that sense, that's fine too. So I personally definitely look at text only picture books. Your mileage may vary. I also am just not, in general, I just want to say, disclaimer, I'm not taking on any more picture books at the moment. I have a lot of picture book clients. But I don't want you to be discouraged if you only write picture books. Like a lot of picture book authors are text only. Like many very, very successful picture book authors are text only. So like, please don't be.
You brought up something that I've never thought about in all the years that I've been swimming in these waters, was the fact that if you find an agent who also has illustrators and you are text only picture books,
Yeah.
that those might be the agents to look for, because maybe they do pair you. So that's interesting. I never thought about
We
that.
try because all we can do is show the editor like, because generally speaking, unless the author is like really, really passionate about a specific, I'm actually dealing with that with an author right now. I showed her my stable and was like, if any of these people are speaking to you, I'd love to, bring their name up when we pitch this project. And she was like, I love these authors, but I just don't love them for this project. No problem. That's totally fine. It is like, at the end of the day, my job is to sell the book the best I can, whether or not they agree to use one of my illustrators, because either way, they're still my client and I still want to do right by them.
Yeah, that's interesting. All right, so here we go. Here's the second one. And I think this is kind of a timely question. And I've heard a lot of people in our community asking about it, because I know when you go for Query Manager, a lot of agents now have that question. Did you use AI in any part of either the writing or submission package? And if you click yes, it just says, well, thank you for your time, but we're not interested. And so people are wondering, where's the line drawn in using AI for writing? Is it okay to use Grammarly, Pro Writing Aid, all those things that use AI to help fix your grammar and your commas, or to brainstorm names or places without disqualifying your manuscript?
Okay, so I am a tough audience for this for a couple of reasons. I do find generative AI to be disqualifying pretty much top to bottom.
Across the board.
Are you a writer or not? is kind of where I come from with it. And obviously I don't take any issue with spell check. You know what I mean? Like in a general sense, and I appreciate that that's how maybe Grammarly and Pro Writing Aid may function in some sense. To be fair, I've never used them. I've never looked them up. So like, also please take my response with a grain of salt, because I'm a little bit ignorant when it comes to how those things function. They may be completely harmless and they may not be. But I do tend to find that if you're serious about this, and you really want to do this as your job, then do it. I don't want to sound too harsh, but it's kind of like, look, I understand why, using AI to brainstorm place and character names seems like whatever, but it's kind of like, are you writing this book or not? What, like, tell me, like, show me what's in your brain. Show me what's like, what your creativity looks like. I just like, and when it comes to things like grammar, I think that like having a polished manuscript is important. I think that everyone should learn, generally speaking, how to put a sentence together with proper syntax and grammar. But if you're missing a comma here and there, no one's going to reject it. That's what copy editors are for. And I don't want people to get so wrapped up in, is my grammar perfect, therefore I will use AI, that they're going to kind of put themselves in a position to not be considered, for instance. But yeah, no, I mean, I do find like and this is like, I'm digressing slightly here, but like, for instance, using like ChatGPT to write your emails, it's like, what are we doing? Like, are we like, what is the purpose of being a writer, if not to write? And I appreciate that obviously writing fiction and writing emails are two different things, but this is how we communicate with each other. Like, why not do it ourselves? So then I'll step off the soapbox now. Basically,
so let me like ask a question that is not in my little banner thing, but you kind of made me think about this, because we just had an author that came in to do a thing about query letters, and he was talking about knowing when your manuscript is ready to pitch. And you said, no one's going to disqualify you if you have a comma in the wrong spot, right?
Absolutely.
So I've heard several people say things like your manuscript is ready to pitch when it's either 90% finished, is what James said. Like, if chapter 5 still needs a little bit of work, but the bones are there. Like, nobody's going to reject you if, it's as long as we understand the story. Sure. I've heard my girlfriend KJ has said, like, it's when it's good enough to go out in the world, but not so good that you can't still change it. That was sort of the line.
That's a very interesting way of putting it. That's really interesting.
So would you sort of agree? I mean, don't worry about a comma, but also
do not worry about a comma.
How finished?
I mean, look, like at the risk of sounding like, well, I'm saying this a little tongue in cheek, but like, I think we all have seen at this point people talking about books that have been acquired that really have barely been edited before they get out into the world, right? That exists. And honestly, I'm a lot more worried about a story that's bad than a missing comma. So to me, that's like, I'm interested in someone who takes this seriously as a job, seriously but not preciously, and is like which I think really speaks to what you say about good enough to sell, but not so good that you can't change a few things if you need to, not so tight, I should say.
Yeah.
And that's because that's, if you want this to be your career, like you're going to have to be collaborative, because you don't do this alone. You're going to have an agent, you're going to have an editor, you're going to have a copy editor, you're going to have a managing editor who's dealing with all the production stuff. You're going to have a marketing and publicity representative. And these are, while all of these things aren't necessarily going to relate to the words on the page, you do need to kind of be prepared to, contend with all of that and answer questions and maybe make some changes if necessary. I mean, and on like a very extreme level, let's say legal flags you and now you need to make some significant changes, which is of course so exceedingly rare, especially in fiction, as to not even be worried about it. Like, that's a little bit absurdist for me to say, but like this is really like, yeah, seriously but not preciously. And I think being in a place where your story is really a clear arc, the characters are doing what they're supposed to be doing, we get like the satisfying or at least resolved sort of ending that we need, and all the pieces sort of fit together in a way that makes sense. The rest is kind of icing in a way.
You took the word right out of my mouth, because as you were talking, I was like, icing. And then you said icing. I was like, good. Okay. So here's another question that I hear all the time, like all the time. So there are a lot of people who are really worried about indie publishing first. Okay. Now, I have a girlfriend who is both traditionally and hybrid published, or indie published, considers herself hybrid in that regard. She indie published first, and she loves it because she owns her backlist. And so now when she sells a book, traditionally it helps feed her back catalog, and it's a really solid business strategy. But I've heard a lot of writers in our community say they're afraid to indie publish first, because what if they don't do it right? I mean, there's a huge learning curve. Is that going to hurt their chances of being picked up by an agent? I think that's the crux of what they want to know.
I would say 10 years ago, it was much harder. I think that now it is less of an issue, although it's still, I mean, I think that it's still something to think about. I find that generally, for instance, I get DMs from people pretty regularly that are like, I need a literary agent. And then they send me a link to their Amazon or Barnes & Noble page of their already published book. And I will say that's largely self-publishing, not even strictly indie publishing. Which is, I think, a little bit of a different beast. But I kind of am like immediately turned off, because it's like, look, if you take this seriously as a career, and I'm not saying that you never tried for an agent before, but it's kind of like, that's, first of all, I think we can all agree that's not how to pitch, right? But also, like, I do tend to think, okay, I always kind of have to wonder, what was the context of you publishing this way first? Because I do think that there's absolutely places where self-publishing or small press publishing is absolutely the right way to go. I don't reject it. I don't think it's lesser. I think that they're, like, especially with genre, like obviously we've seen quite an enormous boom in the last several years of like romance novels. And I think that like fantasy and sci-fi have always had like a great niche in self-publishing. And of course, like, we've seen the ways that books that start there that have sold very well have gone on to have a traditionally published presence and like a career built on top of that. So if your goal is to get an agent and publish traditionally, I think that I would say try and focus on that. But if you are someone who has a lot of time on your hands, because marketing and publicity for a self-published or a small press published novel is a full-time job in its own right. One of my good friends she publishes traditionally on a lot of mostly nonfiction, and she publishes romance novels on her own. But it requires, basically, do you have $35,000 up front to, print your book? And do you have a lot of time and resources to promote that book? Because that's sort of where you see people being really successful in that sphere, is that they're people who have sort of the drive and time and resources to put into really getting it out there and really finding their audience and playing to that audience. And of course, again, your mileage may vary. I don't know what kind of books every single person writes, but genre tends to be a really good place to build that kind of audience and brand recognition. But now, of course, since we're in a place where traditional publishing is really embracing genre, especially romance, and if you do write that kind of stuff, I would advise you to try and find an agent. I don't think that a bad indie publishing record would keep you from finding an agent if the writing is good and if it is what the agent is looking for. But think about the market that you write in. Think about if it's flooded. Think about it, like, also with self-publishing and indie publishing, you may keep more royalties and may in the long run make more money selling on your own than you would traditionally. There's sort of like a lot of moving parts to that, but basically rest assured, like having a bad sales track for one book, especially in like the self-publishing or indie publishing sphere, will not disqualify you from having a career in traditional publishing later on.
Oh my gosh, I have like 10 sub questions for that, but I'm going to hold on to them because I know there's so many questions that my community has submitted. I'm like, dial it back, Abby. Okay, so here's the next one. How does agenting work for educational market opportunities? Is it different from fiction for like commission differences, et cetera, et cetera?
With regards to educational market, do you mean like going to schools and speaking?
I assumed that what she meant, and let me see if I can go back and find. All right, so here's the original query, because what I tried to do was like focus down just to the core to give you the question. She says, I would love to know if Alyssa will be opening up. Okay, I'd love to learn if a client wants to also have an agent help getting into the educational market with publishers and educational resource creators.
Okay.
How do agents help with that process?
Okay, so that would be known as academic publishing. Okay. Generally speaking, I'm sure that there's different spheres. It really depends, because there are agents who a lot of academic publishing doesn't have agents involved at all, and let me tell you, those contracts are terrible. So if you can have an agent involved, I would definitely advise that you do. But yeah, that's so outside of my sphere. That being said, I could definitely see, let's say, a very successful children's author, especially someone who's in nonfiction. Like I've had, for instance, like I've had clients involved in doing what we call write downs, where there was like a book for adults that was like sort of rewritten for a younger audience and like re-edited to sort of make the material more accessible to a younger audience. But that's still done through trade publishing. In terms of like things like textbooks or like pamphlets or things like that, I really have no idea what it would look like to break into that. So I think I'm the wrong person to ask. But generally speaking, I would guess the commissions would be the same, because 15% is industry standard across the board for publishing, in my experience.
I've heard so many people say that. So that sounds okay. How about this one? How can authors balance writing something fresh while also meeting current market demands?
I mean, if I knew this, if I knew how to do this, I would probably be writing bestsellers instead of representing them. But I think the challenge here has a lot to do with how authors work author to author, because there are people who can write a manuscript in 3 to 6 weeks, and they are people, and like it's like a clean manuscript, right? And those are people who could conceivably write something that is responding to the moment a little more urgently, or with a little bit more freshness, if you will, currency, than someone who takes a year to write a book, right? Neither is right, neither is wrong. It really is just totally dependent on how people write a book. I think that, I mean, it also depends on what kind of stories you care to tell, right? Not everybody is writing 5 minutes into the future speculative fiction. And honestly, even if you do, I think that there's probably a lot of, like, I mean, for instance, like we talk about a lot of sci-fi and speculative novels that are still relevant today. I don't think it has to be something that's strictly like, well, this is about right now, and I need to write about right now. Like, for instance, like, and I'm referencing film now, but it's like HAL 3000 is 50 years old, and we're talking about AI now, right? So like, it's not like, again, like you don't really need to be playing specifically to the moment. Um, the only thing right now that I would say in terms of like current market demand, obviously, of course, you have surges like of stuff like romance, right? And if you were already writing that and happened to hit the moment um, with like, a certain level of romantasy, and then of course you have your people that sort of cascade after that, and that lasts 4 or 5 years. But I probably wouldn't tell anybody just to write to that, because you never really know when that well is going to dry up, or when the people like Sarah J Maas, for instance, who are the name brand people that everyone's going to start with because that's the name that always gets passed around. That's not to say that no one will ever pick up your book, but it's like, if her books came out like 10 years ago now. It's the market's very saturated. So I would not necessarily say now is the time to break into this current market thing. It's really more important that you have a strong point of view, kind of regardless of what's going on. And timing and luck are always going to be a big factor of publishing, no matter what. And of course, there are some people who seem to have kind of like a miraculous finger on the pulse. But at the end of the day, like a lot of this is really just about like human nature and like reaching each other and communicating with each other. And it just is kind of easy to mold to the contours of what's going on right now. So I think maybe thinking about your, your themes and your, like the shape of your story in terms of like human resonance may be a more important thing to think about than what is trendy right now.
I know that as I research agents, because I'm also currently querying, I see so many agents right now asking for MG horror, MG horror, MG horror. And I'm
That's
like, oh my God,
so
by the
interesting.
time I write MG horror and get it out, no one's going to want it. I'm like,
that's really, I have to say, that's really interesting that you've seen that around. I have not seen that. But then again, I'm
have
not
you
querying.
not?
Well, I'm not querying. So I'm not
No.
necessarily looking at what other agents want. Although I'm reading a submission, well, not submission. I'm reading one of my clients' manuscripts right now, which is middle grade horror. So that is very interesting because middle grade has been such like a, crapshoot since Barnes and Noble decided they weren't going to stock hardcover debut middle grade. So really, publishers really pulled back on acquiring it. But I knew it would turn around eventually, but it's interesting to see agents looking for that.
Yeah, well, I've seen so many. So you
Fascinating.
have something
All right, I'll
hot
keep
in
an
your
eye on that.
hands.
That's very interesting.
So, all right, here's a middle grade question. If you have a middle grade novel with classic historical elements,
Okay.
how do you find an agent who isn't chasing trends?
This is a hard question to answer because I don't know what classic historical elements means. Because right now, a historical novel could be set in the 1970s. What is classic? Is classic the sinking of the Titanic, Colonial Williamsburg, Julius Caesar?
So this one, I've actually read, I know that the author who asked this question, and I've read parts of her manuscript. And I think what she means by classic tale is it's just at the heart and core of it, it's a story about a kid being a kid. It's not got a lot of technology. It's not got a lot of fantasy. It's just a kid struggling to be a kid and solve a mystery that has to do with his family history.
Okay, great. I don't really know then what is like. then I'm not really sure maybe what this person means by chasing trends, because I mean, do you mean like everyone that, I mean, and I know that you don't know this, I'm just trying to contextualize. Um, by chasing trends, you mean someone who's only looking for instance, middle grade horror, or for romantasy, or like for things that do seem really hot right now? Um, I,
Do
I mean,
you
I'm
think for
not sure.
something like this that maybe what she's really trying to figure out is you have to really know your genre, maybe even your
Mhm,
subgenre, in order to properly
absolutely.
research the agents that are open to taking the flavor of what it is that you
Yeah, because
write?
I mean, historical is like quite popular. So
Mhm.
I mean, I appreciate that middle grade. See, middle grade is tough because middle grade contemporary, like honestly, middle grade is really one of the only areas where contemporary, I think, still has any appeal for the editors. 'Cause, I mean, don't get me wrong, like why like a YA rom-com is allowed to be contemporary. Or like have a contemporary setting in a general sense, but they're also generally speaking, they're looking for like a heavy genre element of like someone getting murdered. You know what I mean?
Mhm. Mhm.
So that I can definitely understand why it seems like contemporary sort of saturates middle grade. Um, but I think, um, yeah, no, I mean, historical is like pretty popular. I appreciate some eras of history are like tend to be a little bit more popular than others. Like you can't freaking, swing a cat without hitting 10 World War II era historicals of any demo. Um, but yeah, no, I mean, I think as long as the character is like compelling, and the story, again, is compelling, and there's a reason that it's set historically, is another
Mhm.
really important thing. I've definitely read submissions where I'm like, okay, is this only set, in the 80s because then they
Those
don't have
cell
cell phones?
phones. Yeah.
Like, look, I mean, I was in high school in the early 2000s when cell phones were barely a thing. And I really think that a lot of authors my age and older are like really trying to like recapture sort of like the YA moment,
Yep.
or like teen experience of that, like the late 90s, early 2000s. And I understand why that is, but it's like, especially if you choose to write for children now, like you really need to like tap into, what's actually going on with children now. And it's not, I mean, yeah, they may be wearing our clothes, but it's not what was happening in 2002. You know what I mean?
Yep, that's for sure, as I'm raising 2 of them right now.
Exactly, well, exactly,
So,
as you well know.
yeah.
Precisely.
So this is a great one. How important is personalization in a query? Which I think is great because I've heard so many agents say maybe 10% of them are personalized. So how do you feel about
I
this?
do not care about it at all. This is just me. This is just me. I do not care. Is the book good? Like, again, I not to be so blunt, but I have gotten about 10 million queries. Some that I requested more, some that I didn't. That was like, oh, I read that you have a cat. I too have a cat. Like basically things along those lines. And it's like,
That's a thin thread.
thank you so much. Or like, oh, I like, you like Harry Potter? I like Harry Potter. It's like, well, it came out when I was 10. So yes, like, I do like Harry Potter. That is, how it goes when you're a certain age. So I just tend to find that the sort of risk reward trade-off just does it really is kind of net zero, like just very neutral. It's like, cool, like I'm like, I appreciate that you read my bio, but at the end of the day, I am much more interested in you reading the stuff that you think that I actually want, in terms of the story, not just in terms of what you think we have in common, sort of superficially, in our day to day lives. Um, I don't. I certainly would never reject anybody for personalizing or not, but it is so completely irrelevant to me, to the point where I do consultations through Manuscript Academy, and if I see someone who has a query with personalization, I almost always just tell them to delete it.
Which is so funny because Manuscript Academy is where I've heard personalize, 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 personalize. And
Like,
I've
it's
been
just, the
telling
question is
people
why.
float it to the top And I've heard so many people say like, they just skim over it if they don't want it. And there's so much pressure on like, just to have this conversation about on the part of the querying author, there's so much pressure to search for those threads that it's hard. So like I queried an agent the other day who they said they loved Miyazaki films.
Sure.
But my book is actually heavily influenced by
now that is where personalization matters. That is where personalization matters.
So I leaned into it, but sometimes I'm like, so the woman who taught me how to query was like, well, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. She's like, if you don't have any connection, but they just take what it is you write, then don't say anything. Just query them. And
that's
to
my mind. I mean,
I'm like 50-50 depending. Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with it, but to me, it doesn't tip the scale at all. At all. Like it's like, thank you very much for noticing this personal thing about me. Is the book any good? You know, like I hope it is, because you do seem nice, but at the end of the day, I am a lot more interested in if the book is going to be a match for me in my list and something I'm going to want to read, and something I think, and really at the end of the day, something I really think that I can sell and do right by.
So here's another one of my sub questions that is not written, but this is a great place to ask it. People are always curious, what does your list mean? Like something fitting or not fitting your list. Does that mean you have connections with editors who are buying those, or publishing houses buying those? What does that mean?
Well, some people, I will say this is like sort of agent dependent as well, because some agents are very much specialized in what they take on. Like there are plenty of agents, I'm sure many of you know, that only take on children's, right? Or don't do children's at all, or only do nonfiction, or only do fiction. I am not in that camp. I kind of have my finger in every pie for the most part. For me, when I consider my list, I consider just sort of the general stuff that speaks to me in terms of sort of subject matter, style of writing, someone who seems like they can have a career ahead of them versus just one book. Just kind of like whatever catches my interest. Some stuff, especially in nonfiction, that does seem timely. That's always nice. Obviously, if it's an illustrator, someone who is whose work I really love, but who's different enough from the other people that I already have. And generally speaking, I have clients who, like, for instance, let's say I have multiple middle grade clients. And obviously there are ways that their stuff overlaps, usually in the way that, I think that they're all sensitive authors who have a real understanding of children and how children think. But I mean, I don't think that they're not interchangeable, right? They have different interests, different ways of writing, different subjects that they're passionate about. So I don't feel like I'm going out with the same book every time I'm working with them. And of course, there's a lot of this that's just dictated by feel, right? I can't necessarily, if you gave me, 20 minutes, I could probably write down sort of like a general, like a couple of columns about what each author, does or doesn't do compared to the others. But, a lot of it is like kind of intuitive, or at least is intuitive now because I've had, 10 years of time behind me to figure it out.
So here's a question that I want to ask, because our community has, I'm actually super impressed, and I am coming from, my background is actually in high school fine arts. So I taught high school for 10 years. And so I have a special place in my heart for the teens in our community. And they're so talented, and they have so much hustle in them, and they want desperately to make it. And they have a long career, ahead of them, or the potential for a long career. So they want to know, what tips do you have for them if they're querying?
Okay, so I have a little bit of like a boring tip first, very logistical tip, which is if you are under 18 years old, your parent has to sign any publishing contract for you. you can't sign it yourself. So that is like a pretty important thing to think about. And it's one of the reasons I do not sign anybody who's under 18. Because if you can't sign your own contracts, I'm not really ready to work with you. And that's not to say, like, I have a colleague or former colleague now who signed a 16-year-old, and I work with that author now, and she's, 30, almost 30. Once my colleague left, she transferred to me. And she has an extremely prolific and successful career. And I certainly don't blame my colleague for signing her at the time. I just wouldn't have, and clearly would have missed out on that. But I will say, if anybody who queries me identifies that they are a teenager, especially under 18, I write back to all of them, because I do think it's important to encourage, kids who are writing, regardless of age, and sort of, because at the end of the day, like, finishing a novel or a book of any kind is a huge accomplishment, whether you get published or not. I've never finished a novel, that's for sure. So I think I would never want to discourage anybody, especially because at the end of the day, this is like a business with a lot of rejection in it. And if they're just getting started, I want them to know that just because it's a no doesn't mean therefore stop writing, or you should, or none of this is going to happen for you till you're 35. That's just not true.
It makes my heart feel so full to hear you say, though, that you write every one of them back, even though you don't sign them.
Yeah.
Because that was probably, that's been really the question that I've heard several of them ask me, like, should I say how old I am in my query? And my answer was yes, for the exact same reason that you said, which is you can't legally sign anything until you're 18 years old.
Yeah.
The agent sort of needs to know that on the forend.
Yeah.
But secretly, the sub reason why I really wanted them to say how old they were was because in my heart of hearts, I hoped that instead of just a form rejection, or instead of just crickets and not writing back and putting them in a pile, the agent would take 5 minutes to say, keep going, kid. Like,
no, I want them to know that, like, trust me, this is just the beginning. And especially because, all of us have been teenagers at one time or another. There are things that feel like it's never going to happen again, or this is the end, or this is the most anything is ever going to get, because of course we're pretty much feeling the most that we're ever going to get in that moment. But like, it's just not true. No. You have plenty of time, and there's nothing but time to continue refining the craft.
And getting better.
And
some of them are so good for being the age that they are, that I'm like, holy crap, people, you're going to rock this.
No, totally. I really do want people to take away that, even a couple of years of passes is so, like, I know that that's a lot and it sucks to get through, but like, that's like, that's not the end. Yeah. Sometimes it just means you got to write another book, which of course is daunting, much easier said than done. But again, like, what do you want out of this job? What do you want out of being a writer? And sometimes people decide that it's just something that they want to do to enrich their own lives for fun. And I support that 1,000,000%.
Nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with it at all. Nothing wrong with it at all. I mean, Emily Dickinson's right there. So,
It's what I always said I'd be. I'm going to die, and they're going to go under my bed and into my closet. And they're going to find all the stuff I've hidden from the rest of the world.
Right. Exactly. And obviously, of course, we all want to be acknowledged in our lifetime. So, like, again, I'm not saying that everybody needs to end up sort of only being posthumously acknowledged, but yeah, no, life is long, for better or for worse.
Yeah. Especially when you're a teen.
Exactly.
But speaking of rejections, and I know this is always a number one question, but what are the biggest reasons you, Alyssa, reject a manuscript?
I think that my answer is probably going to be, I mean, of course, I can only speak for myself, but I think my answer is probably going to be pretty similar to something that a lot of agents will say. And that is that the book was fine. Not the worst thing I've ever read in my life. You know what I mean? But like, the book was fine, but not quite enough for me to feel like it's filling this niche, it's matching this energy that we're looking for, or like, you know, I'm just so compelled by the writing or the characters or the storyline. Sometimes it's just fine. Yeah, I can tell this person knows how to write a sentence. This seems okay, but I'm just not super in love with it. And honestly, agents get that rejection all the time from editors, right?
Mhm.
Like, this is good. The person knows how to write. I just don't love it enough to take it on. And I really feel like probably like 98% of the time, that's kind of where we are. Like, we'll read the query and it's like, okay, looks fine, but not really for me. I'm sure that they'll find the person that really, really resonates with this and really is a champion for them, because I just don't know that I have the, you know, the enthusiasm to bring to it that they need.
So agents feel the same way that readers feel when they walk into the bookstore and they look at all the books, and you know you're not going to love every single one of them, even though they've made
Exactly. It's so true. And I mean, like, it's like, I hope that in a way that is encouraging, because it's like, I don't want anybody to be like, oh my gosh, my book didn't sell, I must be terrible at writing. It's like, it's just not true. Like, there are so many factors.
What I think so many people don't realize too is just because you get picked up by an agent doesn't mean the book is going to sell.
That is true. That is true, and really can be difficult and disappointing for everyone involved.
Yeah. I know I have a girlfriend who got picked up by an agent, and they tried for 3 years to sell the book, and she just had to finally accept that
it's tough.
Not that the book wasn't good, it's just it's not right.
Oh my gosh. I have clients
right now.
I have clients who I've tried to sell books for them, and I just thought the book was like so obvious. Like, I'm like, oh, this is such a slam dunk. And just for whatever reason, that wasn't the one that grabbed people. Maybe the next one did, but you never know.
Okay, so I guess this all kind of fits together. I did try and sort these questions a little bit. So apart from genre fit, what sparks an agent's decision to represent an author? So these were things they guessed: quantity of works, prior publishing history, intangible connection, which is tough because do you not feel like this is a game of Tinder? Like, we're swiping right and left on you guys, and you're swiping right and left on us, and we got to find the one that matches.
Yeah, I think that for me, something that, like, I think that, you know, intangible connection is true, but I also respect that that is not helpful. So I think that when I'm saying intangible connection, I mean writing that makes me feel like writing ideas, a way of storytelling that makes me feel excited, a point of view that makes me feel excited. Because, like, even though I may not be able to say here are the intellectual reasons that I connect with this, or maybe it would take me some more time to put that together. It is something that, like, if, for instance, if I'm reading something and I can already start putting the pitch together in my mind, that is a good sign to me that I am reading something that I think that I would be a good fit to represent, because I'm already starting to say, okay, I know exactly how I would position this. I know exactly what I would say to editors to get them excited to read it, because this is why I'm excited to read it. So that element is sort of like in the same vein as intangible connection, but I hope that can convey something a little bit more tangible about what is going through at least my mind when I'm reading something that compels me. Quantity of works. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to say, I think that's part of what makes this so hard, I think, for a lot of authors to wrap their minds around too, is I feel like in many ways, we're going off of very little information to try and decide, is this person going to connect with my work? And it almost feels like a shot in the dark, especially when you find somebody and you've watched the interviews and you've read the bio and you've done this and you've looked at their social media and you've done all the quote unquote right things. And you think, oh my God, they're going to love this book. They have to love this book. And then they don't connect with it.
Yeah.
And you think, why? Well, we don't really know what they connect with enough, even based on that bit of information.
And it changes, right? It changes over time. There are different things that agents prioritize as time goes on. I mean, I will say something that changed a lot for me that I think is sort of kind of standard. Um, when I was a younger agent and was just not established, you know, there was a little bit more of an impetus to like take on work that needs more editing and more shaping, and take on authors who, are maybe a little more rough around the edges if you really love and believe in the project. That's not really my prerogative anymore because, first of all, I mean, I have 40 clients, you know what I mean? I'm managing a list already, and I really can only take on the stuff that I really feel I can sell pretty quickly because I make commission, right? Like I only make money if I sell the book. So I really need to think about how much effort I can afford to put in on a new client. Like, I mean, I have clients that I have worked with since, you know, day one of starting to take on clients. And I'm really, really grateful that so many of my clients have chosen to stay with me for 10 years. Right. And that's awesome. And in that sense, I mean, I think that some of them do require a little bit more massaging than others, but honestly, I think that we've gotten to a place also where we're used to working with each other, and have sort of like settled those boundaries and ways of working now. But for the most part, I really am thinking about how kind of quickly and effectively I can communicate with that author and turn things around, so we can all get what we want. And also make sure that the book can be effective and successful in its own right once I don't touch it anymore.
See, that kind of leads into this question. I'm going to kind of skip down to the end of where I slid this one in. And I don't think I sent this one to you because it kind of came in last minute.
Sure.
But is it more difficult to get signed by an established agent? Kind of like you're saying, you've got a full client list. Like,
yes and no. Like it's so tough because I guess the short answer is sort of yes, but it is honestly, it really depends so much on what you do, what you care about, and also really how attractive a prospect you are, because you know, I've been in situations as both the young agent and the established agent where there's what we call a beauty contest, where there are multiple offers of representation, and we have to convince the author that we're the right person, either by our passion or our experience or both. And I will say not all the time, but a lot of the time, the established agent will win. And that's understandable to a point. But when you are on a very big list of, like, say, like a Jody Reamer, right, who's like extremely, like, you know, #1 agent on Publishers Marketplace, and she's like amazing at her job, to be 100% clear. This is no shade to Jody Reamer. I'm working on a book with her right now, but she has an enormous list, right? And unless you rise to the top very quickly, if you don't sell right away, you know, she may not have the same amount of time for you that she does for, you know, Shannon Hale. So it really is, like, in a way, it can be great because having her name on your submission can make a difference to editors, right? But once again, even for the most successful, effective, popular agents, there's stuff they don't sell, which I know sounds wild, but it is true.
Yeah.
So I would say don't rule out younger agents. However, I really, really want to convey that the most important thing, because there is no barrier to entry to becoming an agent, none at all. Anybody can do it. Any random off the street can set up a website and say, I'm a literary agent, and start accepting submissions. What you want is to look at agencies that are established, and generally speaking, uncontroversial. And if it is a new agency, look at where the founding agent or agents have worked, how long they've been in the business, and what their deals look like. Because I was really lucky to end up at Stonesong, who have been around for over 40 years and have a ton of well-known established clients in all corners of the market. And I got the chance to work in office with them, and learn from them. And I, even now, like, I know that I can email them, like almost any of the agents I work with, anytime, and get their insight and get their support and get their, like, have their experience, if I need it. But I feel concerned that there are a lot of people who either don't, like, basically, like, we're an agent for a year at an established agency, and then we're like, I can open my own place, and may not have the experience or the mentorship to really manage careers. And that's not to say that they can't sell books. Almost anybody can sell a book if the book is sellable. But I mean, like, really build a business and really build a stable of clients who are successful and be able to, like, replicate that success. So I really just caution every author to be, like, really, really careful when it comes to selecting the business partner that you will be working with. It's easy and very understandable to get excited when someone says that they want to work with you. But I would say if you're looking at newer agents, just make sure that they have mentorship from established agents or agencies, because that's really going to make a big difference, I think.
That's really super sound advice. I could actually listen to you talk about that all day long. It's like, so I love it. I love it. Okay. I know our time is running short and I have 3 more questions, and this is one.
Let's do it.
So hypothetically, if a writer has 3 20K word MG fantasy installments, should they pitch them as separate short books or compile them into one larger volume?
Okay. So
without reading the pages,
generally, right? I actually don't think this is a tough question. It's just there's 2 answers, not opposing answers.
Okay.
So I think that short answer, compile them. However, that depends on what level of middle grade we're talking about. Are we, like, because if we're talking about, 12 to 14, 60,000 words is totally normal, right? 11 to 14. If we're talking about 8 to 10, which is still technically in middle grade, a 20,000 word book may be totally fine. It may be totally like for instance, like Magic Treehouse, right? Or like maybe even a little like step higher. Like those are like lower middle grade and are probably roughly 20 to 30,000 words each. So it really just depends on where you sit on the shelf. But yeah, generally speaking, a 60,000 word middle grade is totally normal. And that's like an extremely normal, good word count for middle grade.
I think that's the hardest part about middle grade is you've got so many reading abilities, so many, all those things that it makes it tough to sometimes zoom in on exactly what it is you should be doing. So, I skipped a question, but anyway, this is still a good one. Does an agent help with social media?
No, I mean, like, I'm sure maybe there are some agents that do. Obviously, like, I will always like post the stuff that promotes my clients. But that is not part of my commission. I'll tell you that. I want every book to succeed that I work on. I care about my clients, but also I don't think that you really need a social media presence to be successful either. My clients I have, an illustrated middle grade that was a bestseller, like a New York Times bestseller. And it was an author illustrator pair. And the illustrator has an enormous social media following, but the author has none at all. And it's still sold very well and was very successful. So I don't think that that's something, and I will say my most successful adult fiction author, no social media presence whatsoever, one of my best-selling authors, period. So it's like, it really isn't necessary. I can see why maybe in like a YA space or like genre space that might feel more urgent or important, especially if you are doing, again, if you're doing like the self-publishing thing and you need that promotional platform, I support that 100%. But again, if it's something that's like you don't really enjoy and it's taking you away from like writing, you don't really need to do it.
People like me, it's not my favorite.
Yeah, and that's totally fine.
So here's my last one that I have, and we're just really eking it in right under the line. I feel like we're doing great here.
We're doing great.
So If you have two different series set in different universes, do you need separate pen names or separate agents for each of these books?
No, probably not. But it also really depends on what we're talking about, because if you mean this one is a middle grade series, that's like, a sci-fi series, and one of them is like a hardcore adult erotica fantasy, then yeah, probably you're going to need two different pen names, not necessarily two separate agents. It really just depends on what those agents represent. But if it's like two YA series set in different universes, yeah, well, this is your career. This is like what you're building on. So yeah, that's definitely, it really is so dependent on market there. But by and large, you can use the same name and the same agent, assuming the agent represents both of those things.
So I'm sort of scrolling through the chat, which I've largely ignored while we've done this because I preloaded everything sent ahead of time. But I see here's kind of a cool question that I did not think about putting a question about being an agent onto the AMA. But do
It's
you
a
have
pretty
any
common
advice if
question.
someone wants to become one?
Okay, so my advice for becoming an agent is actually, I think, pretty similar to the advice that I had for selecting an agent. And that is, you really, really want to hook up with an agency or an agent who is established and knows what they're doing, and also, isn't a butthead. Because you really want someone who can actually dedicate time to mentoring you, and being there for you and helping you figure out what to do. Because even though we're not really like we don't sign the contracts, right? Like we help. I mean, there's I could get into a lot of things about this, but basically what it comes down to is, if you are serious about being a literary agent, ask yourself why. Because if the answer is because I love books, you are not cut out to be a literary agent. That is not what this business is about. This business is a sales job. We do not read books. Like I don't read published books. I read my clients' work. I answer emails. And honestly, half the time, if my clients are established, I don't read their work anymore because their editor just buys the next book. So it's not, it has nothing to do with whether or not you love books and literature. You need to be good at identifying talent. You need to be good at talking to people and being assertive. You need to be good at representing people who may not be assertive. Like these are all aspects of the job that are way more important than loving books, because it's honestly borderline irrelevant. You have to care about books and care about why books are important in society and care about why writing is important, and why good writing and good communication are important. And you have to be able to identify those things. But at the end of the day, like, this is not a romantic job. And I know I sound very harsh about this, but it's because I really do want to discourage anybody who can't handle it from joining the business, because already there are so many agents. This is such a saturated business. There are so many books, there are so many agents. And as I've mentioned before, there are a lot of agents who don't know what they're doing. So I really, really care about the ecosystem of my job and of the publishing industry. And it really frustrates me when I see people trying to get into this because they kind of just think it's going to be sort of like a glamorous book job, where they're just kind of following their passion. It also really frustrates me. And again, this is not an attack. It really frustrates me when people who really just want to be writers decide that they should be a literary agent. Those are two different jobs. If you want to be a writer, be a writer. I think that I do find it difficult when I see agents, who basically prioritize their writing career and they're like competing with their clients. And it's like, that's like, I'm not saying that makes you a bad agent or an unethical agent, but it is something to look out for, especially if you're looking for, an agent. It's certainly not a bad thing to have an agent who is an author. I know agents who are authors who are very effective, but they also know how to draw the line. And their writing career is like virtually invisible compared to their presence as an agent. And I know that I know how sort of serious and intense I come off about this, but I really do love my job and I take it very seriously. And I want other people who want to do this job to take it seriously. So I really try to, like, if you love books, buy books, read books, write books. Like, that to me is so much more important than sort of this idea of like kind of an agent to therefore sort of have access to sort of like a perceived romantic idea of publishing, because it's just not true. And I would say the same thing about becoming an editor. It's just not true. If you want to work in publishing, I would say being a managing editor, working in publicity and marketing, doing like a non-editorial job is going to be so much better, because you're still going to be able to read. But I just, I don't really get to read.
Yeah, because we all assume you get paid to read books all day,
It's just not
that
true.
it would be fun, and it's not the
just not
case.
true. I only get paid when I sell books, not read them.
Well, thank you for coming.
Yeah, and on that note,
talking to everybody today. We had a ton of questions. Man, we covered a bunch of ground. I was worried last night. I was like, will we get to all the questions? Will I not have enough questions? Like, I didn't know which way it was going to go. It was awesome. So perfect. I'm going to say goodbye to everybody in the chat, and I will say goodbye to you in just a second after the stream ends. So everybody, thanks for joining us. Hank's doing a writing sprint, or Doug's doing a writing sprint today at 12:30. So come back to YouTube and join us there. Otherwise, thank you, Alyssa, for coming, and all the people out there in the internet world. We'll see you later.